Imagine you had a time machine. Would you go visit ancient Rome? Perhaps see the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza? Or maybe go see the start of civilization as we know it? Unfortunately, we can't do that in real life, but in Elden Ring, things are different. The simple act of taking an elevator to the underground would take you back in time, where you can see those ancient civilizations yourself. One of the most interesting yet mysterious of those civilizations are the ancestral followers. Those followers/shamans that roam the ancestral woods. They are incredibly tied with nature in a way that reminds you of indigenous people. They herd and hunt animals as well as worship the ancestor spirit. Even their weapons and their armor are made out of animals. But where did they come from? How does they view the lands between and the Golden Order? What is the ancestral spirit exactly and how did we access it? I believe by looking into the indigenous people in real life and comparing them to the ancestral followers, we may discover a lot of mysteries. Let's go back in time together. In ancient times, the cult of the deer had a very important significance in the ideology of the primeval people. This cult included myth and rituals connected with the worship of a deer or a man-deer, the ancestor of people and deer. The most important evidence supporting a deer cult in traditional societies are the domestic myth connected with the reproduction of deer and hunting magic rituals. These rituals were performed above all by shamans. The attributes of shamans were bow and arrows, deer skin, and crowns of deer antlers. We can see here an illustration of the shaman, and we can see a very big visual similarity with Elden Ring. But I believe it's not just a visual inspiration. From comparing the real-life cult of the deer to Elden Ring, we can discover some of their mysteries. I believe just like real life, the ancestral followers represent one of the first religious practices on the timeline of Elden Ring. In a time before the Golden Order, those followers lived on the surface instead of the underground. We can actually see a couple of them around minor Erdtrees and the remains of the old dynasty on the surface. Those followers worship nature and the ancestor spirits. They have their own cycle of death and rebirth outside the system of the Golden Order. They only use materials from nature, but why? And when did they get pushed to the underground? Contrary to the popular beliefs, the indigenous people did actually acknowledge a supreme god, a creator god. They also believed in the Worldtree. It was important for them. But they chose not to worship this creator god. But why? There are actually two reasons. First, the supreme god didn't have much involvement in the daily life of those hunters and gatherers, so they couldn't use his help to make things like hunting easier. So they turned to worshipping those ancestral spirits so they can help make their hunt easier and their harvest bountiful. And indeed, the greater will doesn't interact much with the lands between. He leaves this to the god of the age. The second reason is because in some myth, the creator god left humanity after he created them. This opened the path to spirits of nature and ancestor spirits to make the humans worship them. I believe the same is correct for the ancestral followers of Elden Ring, and this will solve a huge mystery. On the surface level, we can come across some ruins from the old dynasty. Alongside those ruins, there are a bunch of ancestral followers. And at the minor Erdtree around there, we can find some more of them. They are dancing in front of the minor Erdtree in a way similar to how they dance when worshipping the spirits. But this seems contradictory, especially when looking at the description of their armor, as well as the remembrance of the regal ancestor spirit. First, the armor reads as follows. The ancestral followers keep their distance from the Erdtree, awaiting new buds. They are certain to sprout from their very flesh and indeed their souls. But in the light of shamanistic beliefs, we can solve this mystery. As I said, they believed in a world tree and a supreme god, yet it wasn't the center of their worship. The same applies in Elden Ring. The ancestral followers acknowledge the Erdtree, yet they choose to keep their distance as stated in the description. But when the surface level followers got in front of the minor Erdtree, they couldn't stop themselves from interacting with it. Now let's read the description of the regal ancestor spirit. Remembrance of the regal ancestor spirit hewn into the Erdtree. Ancestral spirits exist as a phenomena beyond the purview of the Erdtree. Life sprouts from death as it does from birth. Such is the way of the living. Again, this may seem contradictory. How is it hewn into the Erdtree, yet the ancestral spirits phenomena is beyond the purview of the Erdtree? It's again because the ancestral spirits is connected to the Erdtree, yet they chose to make their own cycle of life and death outside the purview of the Erdtree. The ancestral spirit is connected to the crucible, and the crucible is the primordial form of the Erdtree. We will go over this in a moment. But now we can solve this mystery. Actually, if you looked close enough, you would find that the cycle of life of the ancestor spirit isn't actually much different from the Erdtree's cycle. The cycle of life and death of the ancestral spirits is literally shown to us in the fight. But how does it actually work? Let's read the description of the stalwart horn charm together. Said to be a budding horn, the ancestral followers believe that the horns of a long-lived beast continue to bud like antlers over and over again until the beasts one day become an ancestral spirit. Now let's put it together with the ancestral spirit's horn. Item cut from the horns of the regal ancestor spirit. A number of new growth bud from the antler, like horns of the fallen king, each glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. So this cycle of life is focusing on obtaining power from the dead. Sounds familiar? But there is a question. What is a budding horn? Let's read its description together. This horn began to sprout on a beast that typically bears no horn. Perhaps it's a vestige of the primordial crucible. It seems those horns are connected to the crucible, and we can see that on many creatures. But in the case of the ancestral spirits, those horns keeps budding until the beast turns into an ancestral spirit. So it seems the power of the spirits come from the horns which come from the crucible that later became the Erdtree, and that's why both cycles get their power from consuming the dead. During our fight with the ancestral spirit, some very interesting abilities are used. One of those is consuming the spirits of dead animals and gaining HP from them. This ability isn't just present in the fight. In the description of the winged great horn, we can read that the weapon is used to reap the lives of beings that experience no sprouting. Those human sacrifices seems to take their life force because they will not be able to make the normal cycle. Also, the great horn hammer description reads as follows. The ancient horn is imbued with the power of the ancestral spirits. A small amount of HP is restored upon defeating an enemy. So the power of the ancestral spirits is stealing the life force of other beings. Life sprout from death. This concept is the same for the Erdtree, where people are buried in the roots of the tree. Their life force gets consumed by the tree, and then life can sprout from the Erdtree once more. That's why I said the two concepts are basically the same. Also worth noting that the ancestral spirit antlers looks a lot like a tree. But another mystery is the fight itself, the music, the atmosphere, and the place. I believe the fight actually takes place in our dreams. Going back to shamanistic practices, one of the most important is a trance. A trance is where you are half conscious, and it's usually associated with hallucinations like spirit voices or sightings. In order for a shaman to become one, they need to go into their trance and meet their ancestral spirit. They usually make a spiritual trip with a couple of steps to enter the trance. This trip is usually associated with fasting from food and the consumption of narcotic plants. The shaman then go into the trance and meet the spirits, marking the start of his shaman duties. I believe the same is happening in Elden Ring, where our journey and effort to light the braziers is representing the journey of the shaman. Then after completing it, the ancestral spirit dead body is activated and we can go into our trance, where we kind of fight the ancestral spirit in our head. That would explain the teleportation, atmosphere, music, and the whole vibe of the fight. We were in our trance. That's why we were able to access the ancestral spirit. The ancestral spirit who is inhabiting some kind of a spirit realm that we don't really know anything about. But what is the worldview of the ancestral followers exactly? As we said already, the real-life shamans did acknowledge a creator god and the Worldtree. This creator god created Earth and humans. Earth is quite interesting in their belief, where there are several planes of existence. Let's read this together. The world is disc-shaped, saucer-like, and includes several planes of existence. The Earth, or central world, stands in water held on the back of a colossal creature that may be a turtle, a huge fish, a bull, or a mammoth. Let's stop here for a moment and look at this specific piece of ruin. We can clearly see here the same description of Earth as we just read. There is a bull holding the Earth on his back, and this Earth is disc-shaped. But in Elden Ring version, there is an interesting detail. What are those circles in the middle of the disc? Real-life myth never talked about those, and illustrations doesn't have them. This made me think that FromSoft added those to represent, you guessed it, the Elden Ring. I think this may be the way those ancestral followers viewed the Elden Ring, a version of it, perhaps an incredibly older one, and the bull is how they imagined the Elden Beast. Going back to their several planes of existence, we can read the following. The central world is surrounded by an immense belt that connects it to the lower world through an umbilicus of sorts. It connects to the upper world by the pillars of the world. The upper world consists of 3 or more strata. On the navel of the earth stands the cosmic tree, which reaches up to the dwelling of the upper gods. The lower world, central, and upper are all inhabited by spirit beings. Some words here did ring a bell for me, like the pillars of the world, which really reminds me of those iconic FromSoft trees. The whole concept of their earth being in the middle where you can access it through certain means. Also the Worldtree, of course, that leads to the dwelling of the upper gods. But to be honest, I feel like the DLC would shed so much light on the planes of existence in the lands between. So let's not speculate much on this topic, and we will see really soon. The last thing I want to talk about is a timeline of those ancestral followers in the lands between. Were they always underground, or did they one day live on the surface? I believe that they did indeed live on the surface. My reason for such belief are 2 things. First, the existence of several groups of those followers on the surface alongside the ruins. And the second is much more unfortunate. We already established that the ancestral followers represent the indigenous people. In real life, those people got persecuted, eradicated, and their land stolen from them. All of this under the propaganda of making a better world and getting rid of those savages. They were pushed out of the lands and confined to camps. I believe the same happened in the lands between. Marika and her followers attacked the ancestral followers and killed most of them. The rest were forced to flee underground to escape the grim fate of their friends. At the time we arrive to the lands between, we find them underground after many centuries have passed. So we get the impression that this was their original home, but I don't think so. This may actually solve a huge mystery. This mystery is the existence of two forms of ancestral followers, a spirit variation and a living physical variation. Those spirits may be the dead followers that were killed by the Golden Order. Their spirits remained due to their connection to the ancestral followers, and they kind of protect their new real home and the rest of their people. I also believe this theory is much more stronger after the story trailer of the Shadow of the Erdtree. I think we will get a lot of backstory on those events, where the Golden Order eradicated entire civilizations. Hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed, and tell me in the comment section what you think. Hopefully I will try to release a video every day until the DLC release to help pass some time. Those videos are a part of a series that was scheduled way earlier, but unfortunately I had some real life problems going. So stay tuned for the rest of the series and see you next time. Until then, farewell, fellow Tarnished.